Konnichiwa, and welcome to the Samurai Way, the podcast where we dive into the wisdom of the samurai, the art of Japanese living, and the philosophies that help us live with purpose and perseverance. I'm Lori Tsugawa, and whether you're here to explore Bushido, the samurai, uncover the meaning of Ikigai, or just looking for a little extra gambaru, never give up spirit in your daily life, you're in the right place. So grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's walk this path together. Are you ready? Let's begin. Frank King, suicide prevention speaker, writer for The Tonight Show for 20 years, speaker and comedian for 39. His speaking is informed by his lifetime of depression and suicidality, and coming close enough to ending his life that he can tell you what the barrel of his gun tastes like, turning that long, dark journey into the soul of 13 TEDx talks, sharing his life-saving insights with corporations and associations. He shared the stage with comedians such as Jeff Foxworthy, Adam Sandler, and Jerry Seinfeld. So please help me welcome Frank King. So Frank, what I'd like to start with, since most people are some of the audience here may not know you, but you shared with me that you knew about Ikigai, or what your purpose in life was, at a very young age. Would you like to start there?
Yes, and I think as a stand-up comic, monologist, singular, I'm something of a Ronin. I have no, yes. And I saw this quote the other day. Doing stand-up comedy is like going to war. If you want to kill, you've got to risk dying. So as a Ronin and a warrior, every time I step on stage, you want to kill, but you're going to risk dying. Actually, I knew my purpose. I found my purpose in the fourth grade. I told a joke in front of the whole class, and the kids laughed. The teacher was hysterical. She had to excuse herself to go to the teacher's lounge. And yeah, and years later, I ran into her at the grocery store. I said, Mrs. Dark, why did you go to the teacher's lounge? She said, Frank, that was the funniest thing a child had ever said to me before or since. I was afraid I was laughing so hard, you'd misinterpret my laughter and it would break your heart. So then she says, well, what are you doing for a living? And I said, stand-up comedy. And she goes, duh. So at 9, I decided I was going to be a stand-up comic. And then high school, I loved high school. A lot of people hate I loved high school. I almost stayed an extra year because you could do that back then. I take another Spanish class, brush on trigonometry, which I was horrible at, take a typing class, which I wish I had. But anyway, 12th grade, I'd been taking drama for 3 years. Never got a speaking part in any school play. And I thought, I see a pattern. So I thought, you know what? If I do that stand-up, I can write, direct, produce, and star in my own little show. So I did stand-up at the talent show in 12th grade. Nobody had ever done stand-up before. And I won. Of course, I beat the accordion player and the folk dancers, but still, it's a victory. I told my mother, I'm going to LA, be a comic. She's big on education. She goes, no, son, you're going to college first. I don't care what you do when you get done. You can be a goat herder for all I care, but you're going to be a goat herder with a college degree. So I went to UNC Chapel Hill, picked up a BA and a BS, and then bolted for the West Coast. And 40 years ago, last month, I did my first open mic night. And halfway through my 5-minute set, here's how I know it's my purpose. Halfway through my 5-minute set, I heard a voice inside my head go, you're home. So, and I thought, I'm going to do this for a living. Had no idea how. 18 months later, I said to my girlfriend, now my wife of 38 years, I'm going on the road to be a comic full time. You want to come along for the ride? Figuring she'd go, hell no. She goes, yeah. So we gave up the apartment and our jobs, jumped in the car, and I was on the road for 2,000. We were on the road 2,629 nights in a row nonstop. 7 years and change. Comedy club to comedy club, beer bar to beer bar, a drunk idiot screaming, tell us some jokes we can dance to. That's a quote. Anyway, did a little radio after that tour came to an end, and then jumped to corporate comedy because clubs were closing faster than opening, and my act was clean, so I knew I could, do after dinner, after lunch conferences, and people ask me, what's the difference between a club comic and a corporate comic? Well, about $5 grand a night plus travel. So I'm no math major, Lori, but that, and I've several of my comic friends said, you sold out, you went corporate. I go, yeah, I'm a whore, but I'm a high priced whore. So, and then in 2010, the bottom dropped out of the speaking market, overnight practically. And we lost everything in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And that's when I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like. Spoiler alert for the audience, I did not pull the trigger. A friend of mine came up after a keynote last year. He thought it'd be funny. He goes, "Hey man, how come you didn't pull the trigger?" I go, "Hey man, because you try to sound slightly less disappointed." That's where the humor is in the topic, not jokes, but funny personal anecdotes. So that's how I got, and I, I'd always wanted to make a difference, Lori. I always want to speak and make a difference. I just couldn't figure out how. And finally, I realized, given my near suicide, the fact I live with two mental illnesses, and there are more nuts in my family than in a squirrel turd, that I could speak on suicide prevention if I got some training, and I did. Then I thought, now who would take me serious after 2.5 decades of comedy? So I did my first TEDx on suicide prevention. And two other events saw it and said, do you have any more mental health topics? Oh, yeah. And so I've done 13 of those, and I just booked my 14th to all have some element of mental health, mental illness in the talk. So that's how we got here today. I make my living traveling the country. I just got back from Newfoundland, a little tiny town in Newfoundland. I speak on suicide prevention, generally as a workplace health and safety priority. But in this little town in Newfoundland, there were 170 teenagers, high school students, did that in the morning and then did a community group in the evening.
And so the Japanese have that concept called Ikigai. And just for FYI and other people, I've been learning it more, the more, shall we say, Japanese way. And it's not the Venn diagram. So I'm going to, it's more of a verb. It's a state of being. It's finding your purpose, but it's not always really connected to money. But what they really want people to do is how are you going to help others? It's not Ikigai if it's just about me, me, me. It's Ikigai if it's more of a collective thing. And that's how the Japanese society is.
Well, and yes, and um, my goal in life is to save a life a day. And I, I, you know, I realized at some point when I speak, I get done. I say to the audience, let's do some general Q&A. And if you have a story you want to tell or question you want to ask, but not in front of everybody, I'll hang out extra 30, 45 minutes. And there's always a line, sometimes two people, sometimes 10, because my job is to give them permission to give voice to their feelings and experiences. And I've heard some harrowing stories. I mean, and it occurred to me that I'm sort of like George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. I've seen what these people's lives might be like if I weren't there to tell my story and share theirs. And if I kill myself, theoretically, I could take some of those people with me who never had a chance to hear me speak and then to share their story with me. So I'm afraid I'm stuck. I can't kill myself. So, which is probably a good thing.
That is a good thing. It is.
But it is about the collective. It is about, I spoke at a Army base in California, Fort Irwin, the National Army Training Center. They've done an anonymous survey. 30% of the soldiers, male and female on the base, 30% had thought about suicide in the last year. So they brought me in. And a couple of months later, because I'd met the base psychologist, a couple of months later, the base psychologist DM'd me on LinkedIn. He said, Frank, a soldier walked in this morning and said flat out, I'm depressed and suicidal, and I'm here because Frank King said I had to tell somebody. Yike. That gave me goosebumps.
Wow.
And that's happened frequently. It's, and because men generally don't share those things. That's one of the reasons men have such a high suicide rate is they don't reach out. And it's not just mental reaching out for help, Lori. We tend not to take care of our bodies. Physical health. I've got two friends. One died of prostate cancer. One died of colon cancer in the last 2 years. And I would wager that the one who died of prostate cancer never had a PSA, and the one who died of colon cancer never
Never
had
had
a colonoscopy.
colonoscopy.
Because men, there's a reason women live longer. There's,
Wow, those are amazing statistics. And how did you come up with the goal of saving one life per day?
It just occurred to me. It just, I thought, because people ask you what's your goal in life. I thought, save a life a day. If you can just save one, there's a Jewish expression, I think,
Mhm.
save one person, save the world.
World. If you save the life of one person, that's from the Talmud, as if
Yes.
you save the world.
So there you are. And I imagine some days I save more than had a young man come up to me after a presentation on site at a construction site. Six guys lined up. Most times guys don't line up, but six guys lined up to share a story. Last guy in line, African American gentleman, mid-20s, I'm guessing, crying so hard he can't speak. So I waited. When he gathered himself, I said, "What's up?" He said, "Well, I haven't slept in 2 nights. I work on the fifth floor of this building. I think about jumping off every day." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Because I've lost three people close to me in the last year to violence, including my daughter who died in my arms." I'd like somebody pull the pin on that grenade drop in your lap.
Oh,
So the HR guy who hired me wasn't standing far away, so I waved him over. I said, "Look, Chief, you need to go and get the EAP, Employee Assistance Program binder, find the nearest mental health facility to where we're standing right this minute, and take this gentleman by the hand and get him there for evaluation because he's circling the drain." So a couple of months later, I had occasion to talk to the HR fellow, and I was terrified to ask. Finally, I got up my nerve. I go, "Whatever happened to that nice African American gentleman, Frank? He got evaluated. He got medicated. He's back on the job." Oh, I guess that was my one that day. So yeah, it's very therapeutic for me
mm-hmm.
to share and then have, you know, maybe I've steered them far enough off the path of suicide they'll live a normal life.
Wow. Now that goal just about brings tears to my eyes.
Yeah, well, it's all about the community. It's about the collective.
Hmm. 2 weeks ago, I gave a speech to survivors, Holocaust survivors, like second and third generation. And they took me to the memorial, and it was just the same thing. Chione Sugihara saved lives, and he risked his life. And he says, I have to save lives. My government said no, but I can't. I'm going to disobey my government, but people are going to live.
Yep.
Over 6,000 received their lives, and 2,000 visas with over 6,000 lives. And oh, it's heart wrenching. It's just, wow. What a man.
Yes. And it's getting worse. When I did my first TEDx, I put the stats on the screen about the US. 8 million people seriously contemplate suicide, 1.4 million attempt. And at the time, 39,000 completed suicides in 2014. Now it's over 50,000 a year. So it's gotten worse.
Worse.
That's one every 9 minutes and one every 40 seconds worldwide.
Oh,
Would you like some good news, Laura?
yes.
Okay. I tell the audience, well, here's the good news. 8 out of 10 people, 8 out of 10 who are suicidal are ambivalent. They can't make up their minds. 9 out of 10 give hints in the last week leading up to an attempt. And I say to the audience, look, you can make a difference. You can save a life. And you can do it by doing something as simple as we're doing right here. And that is having a conversation if you know how. And before you leave, you will know how. And I pass out candy. They have these individually wrapped large wintergreen lifesavers. So I got to have whoever booked me got a big bowl of them and they pass everybody out. Everybody gets a lifesaver individually wrapped. So, but I don't say anything about it till the end. I go, you probably wondered about the candy. I bet you some of you already know it's wintergreen. Couldn't wait. But here's the deal. That's a lifesaver. And now you are too.
Could you give a few more, shall we say, basic, what you tell people?
Yes. My learning objectives, the how-tos. Uh,
Mhm.
People ask me, how do you spot depression? Well, this is not an exhaustive list, but it's three or four of my top indications. They sleep too much, they can't sleep, or they eat too much, can't eat. They have trouble getting out of bed in the morning, so often late for work or school, but in the afternoon rally like a different person. They let their personal hygiene go. So as long as you've known them, they've been pretty well put together. The last couple of weeks, hair's kind of dirty, clothes aren't quite so clean. So maybe because they're having trouble getting out of bed, simply to take a shower, run a little wash. The question comes up, what do you say to somebody who's depressed? Well, let's start with what you don't say. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Turn that frown upside down. My personal favorite, by the way, have you tried fish oil? At which point I go from suicidal to homicidal. Uh, what you do say is, I'm here for you and I mean it.
Mm.
I know you're not crazy or lazy or self-absorbed. I know that the depression is a mental illness. Here's the good news. With time and treatment, things will get better. I'll take the time. I'll help you get the treatment. And then you have to ask this question, which is very difficult. Are you having thoughts of suicide? Just like that. And I tell the audience, if you can't ask that question, find somebody who can. And if you can't find anybody, here's my cell phone number. Call me and I'll ask that question because it actually lowers the chances, reduces the chances they'll die by suicide, rather than the old wives' tale that you should never mention the word suicide in front of somebody because it might give them the idea, which I think is ridiculous. Suicide? What a great idea! Why didn't I think of that? Trust me, it crossed my mind. Yeah. So now the next question is, how do you know if somebody's suicidal? Well, there are indications. If you ask them if they're suicidal and they say no, but your gut tells you, I think they may be. What do you look for? Well, they talk about death and dying a lot. To catch them Googling death, dying, or how to die by suicide. Death appears in their artwork or their writing or their music. And they are getting their affairs in order, especially if they're giving away prized possessions, because they want to make sure the possessions go to the people they want them to go to when they're gone. And here's a counterintuitive one, very dangerous, and I've come across this several times. They've been depressed for a long time, and now they're happy for no apparent reason. And you're happy because they're happy. The problem is they may be happy because they've chosen time, place, and method, and they know the pain is about to come to an end. And I've come across several suicides like there where the family tells me, they came to the family reunion, they seem like they're on top of the world, they talk to everybody, and then gone. So it's very that's a tough one to spot because you're happy because they're happy, but then because a lot of people aren't aware that most people who die by suicide do not want to kill themselves. They just want to end the pain.
Mm.
Some do want to kill themselves, but the majority just want to end pain. Now, let's say they tell you they are suicidal. What's your next step? Well, you say, do you have a plan? And if they have a plan, what is your plan? And if it's detailed, time, place, and method, you need to do your best to get them to a mental health facility. At the very least, on the phone with 988, the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, or texting the 988, either way. Now, this is not in a book I've ever read. This is not in a course I've ever taken. I always wondered, what if they had a plan for suicide, but it wasn't really well formed? A psychiatrist and I came up with this. We would say, okay, tell me something. Are you going to kill yourself? No? Tell me why not. Make them give voice to whatever's keeping it, because something is keeping them here, and then leverage that to keep them around for another day.
Mm.
That's that I teach that, and my takeaway is I think everybody needs a self-care plan. Whether you're neurotypical or neurodiverse, whatever, you need to. So one of the reasons my mentally ill friends and I sailed through the COVID, the pandemic, we all have self-care plans. We wake up in an uncertain world every day, whether there's a pandemic or not. So you got to have some way to get out of bed. Mine is diet. I'm on the keto diet and I fast occasionally. Exercise. That's my non-negotiable. Exercise every day. Uh, Diet, exercise, good night's sleep. People discount a good night's sleep. You hear people say, I give out on 3 hours sleep a night. Oh, dear Lord. So diet, exercise, good night's sleep, meditation twice a day. It's called a cat napper. It's a guided meditation and a little bit of medication. And the thing about those 5 things, the through line, Lori, those are all things I can control. I tell people you got to let the rest of it go. Politics, whatever. You can't. There's nothing you can do about it. You need to control the things you can control. So, that's what I'll leave the audience with. I said everybody should have a self-care plan of some kind.
Mm-hmm. It's more prevalent than we realize. And I know in Japan it's a little different how they look at it. And the
Yes.
samurai had two swords. One was for This fight, the long one was for battle, and the small one was seppuku for.
Yes. Ooh, that's a tough way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's no real good way to die, but that one,
Oh, I
that's
know.
whoa. Yeah, it's yeah, and I put my phone number on the screen every time I speak.
Oh, you do? Okay.
And I said, look, if you're suicidal, call 988. If you're just having a bad day, call a crazy person. Here's my cell. And about once every couple of weeks, somebody calls about themselves, about a friend, a family, a loved one. Um, a guy called one day and he said he was depressed and suicidal, saw me speak, and he mentioned in passing he picked up an Amtrak schedule. And I said, look, I'm not going to tell you not to kill yourself. That's not my jam. What I am going to ask you is don't do it via train because no doubt when you step on those tracks and right before the train hits you, you and the engineer are going to lock eyes. You're going to kill yourself and ruin their lives. So, you know, I'm not saying don't kill yourself, but I would ask you not to do it that way. So don't take somebody with you. Although I got to tell you, I got a list. Uh, people I would take with me. And said in jest, of course,
Yes.
because I can't do it because there'd be people who never got a chance to hear me speak. I'd take them with me. So I'm
Hmm.
afraid I'm. Plus, I'm 68 years old, Lori, and I had the thought the other day, suicide. Wait a minute, I'm 68. What's the rush? I mean, how much longer do I have? Why rush it? So,
Well, I'd like if you wouldn't mind, I would like you to share about being a TEDx speaker. I've done a couple of
hmm.
TEDx talks, but not 13 or 14.
Yes, it's each one has some aspect of mental illness, mental health, and so it,
Hmm.
it builds my brand as the mental health comedian, mentalhealthcomedian.com. And I just kept having ideas. I just kept, for example, I kept bumping into people who were really talented in some ways, but had mental challenge, depression, anxiety, whatever. I thought this cannot be a coincidence. There's just too many talented people who have these struggles. So I did some research. Sure enough, that there is a connection oftentimes. I mean, not causation, but certainly a connection between that. I believe my depression and thoughts of suicide are simply the flip side of my comic ability and imagination. Same brain, same wiring.
Hmm.
And so Kanye West, I mean, politics aside, one of the musical geniuses of his generation, and he lives with bipolar disorder, I believe. And so there's this Alexander Hamilton had bipolar disorder. They believe, looking at the historical records, worked days and nights on end, hypersexual, then crashed and burned. I mean, it's obvious to psychologists that that's probably what was going on, but super talented. And so I did a talk called Mental with Benefits, the Evolutionary Advantages of Mental Illness. And it starts off like this. What if those of us living with a mental illness are not living with a genetic mutation, but an amazing evolutionary adaptation? What if mental illness is, as Malcolm Gladwell says of such things, a desirable disadvantage? You never wish it on anybody, but it does come with certain advantages. So that I just had that idea and I did some research and so they did one called depressive realism. There is some research, not a ton, but some, that people with depression see the world more clearly and outcomes more clearly than people who are have a positive cognitive bias. And so I did the research and I found that turns out that's the case. So yeah, I just keep pop. My favorite, the only one I ever got a standing ovation for, mental health and the orgasm. Treat your depression single-handedly. I didn't even have to audition. I said to him, I love my iPhone, but it's my second favorite handheld device. And they said, Frank, you don't have to audition. Just come here and do that. So yeah, so I just keep, these ideas keep climate. The last one I did was on climate change. I thought there's got to be some mental health effect for people because of climate change, whether they happen to be in the path of the hurricanes and wildfires and whatever, or just outside those areas. And turns out depression, PTSD, anxiety, there's actually something called eco anxiety They may not have ever experienced, being driven from their homes by some sort of natural disaster, but they're worried about it. So that's how I connected, mental health and climate change.
Would you say that people of that, well, like you, have multiple ideas and
Mm. Yeah, a friend of mine wrote a book, and we're chatting about it. She'd worked on Madison Avenue in advertising for about 25 years. She wrote a book on the cavewoman brain is not that different from the brain today. The hardware is roughly the same, the software's changed. And she wrote a book on it. And so she said, I need a title and subtitle. I said, well, my method is I put that idea, she needs this. And I go to bed. And then in the morning, I wake up and oftentimes I lie there in the dark for half an hour, just thinking. I think we've lost the ability to do nothing. So I just lie there. And sure enough, the ideas started to come. And I was texting her over and over and over and over. She finally texted back. She goes, Frank, I worked on Madison Avenue for 25 years. I've never seen anybody write copy this good that fast. And I think that's just because of the way my brain works is, once I ask it for that, I think I broke the knob off it somewhere. It just keeps coming. Yeah, so I think the creativity, and there's also a reason, Lori, when I get heckled, I can fire back and literally not think. People come up and ask me, "Man, how'd you think of that when that person heckled?" You want to know the truth? I didn't think it. When you heard it, I heard it. I had no idea where that came from. Had a woman one night, they're throwing her out of the club because she was drunk. She's been causing trouble the entire night. And she gets to the door of the club. And then all of a sudden she's turning back toward me. And I'm thinking, well, she probably heard something that sounded like her name because drunks are voice activated. And people came up, how'd you think that? I didn't think that up. I have no idea where that came from. It just popped out of my mouth.
Mhm.
But I think that's a yin and yang. That's that mental illness, and somebody said, I thought, what if I could take it one pill one time and never be depressed again and never have suicidal thoughts again? Would I take it? No, I would not. I I, I would give it to somebody who really is in deep trouble and is struggling with it. Because if that made me not think like a comedian, because I can teach you to write stand up and do stand up. I can't teach you to think like I do. Can't the incoming information
Mhm.
process. And I got to tell you, I taught a class called Stand Up for Mental Health. You have to have a diagnosis to get in it and diagnosis to teach it. And they were the best students I ever had. The stuff that came out of their mouths was ready for prime time. Most comics, when they write a joke, it's like a page, and you have to go through and redact two-thirds. These kids, when we got together in the morning for class, I said, "Okay, what do you got?" And Trish said, "My boyfriend said he wants to break up with me." I said, "Well, uh, did you ask him why?" "Yeah, he said he wants to see other people." I said, "Well, what'd you say, Trish? I'm bipolar. Give me a minute." And that's the way it came out of her head. Yeah, there's a woman, horrible story. Her father sold her into white slavery starting at the age of 8. I mean, she had a laundry list of mental problems, but brilliant. I said, Camille, what do you got for me? She goes, well, I went to see my psychiatrist. Yeah. He asked me if I was depressed. I said, yeah. He asked me if I was having thoughts of suicide. I said, yeah. He asked me if I had a plan. I said to him, I have 5 plans. He said, 5 plans? She goes, yeah. I said to him, do you want to hear them all or just the ones that involve you? And that's the way it came out of her head. I mean, it's dark, but there's not a word in there that doesn't move the narrative forward. I mean, there's no fat on that joke. I know comics, 20 years in the game, can't write jokes that tight. And bear in mind, the graduation for this class is to get on stage and perform for the public. Now, public speaking is a terror to a lot of people. Imagine public speaking on your mental illness. And the whole idea of doing it is to reduce the stigma, to change the way people think about mental illness. 'Cause you see these kids up on stage just rocking it, high functioning, and maybe it'll change your view of what mental illness looks like.
Mm. You have advice for people that are aspiring to become a TEDx speaker.
Hmm.
Okay.
There's a great book. It's called Talk Like TED. Talk Like TED. The
Okay.
author's name is Carmine Gallo, like the wine, Gallo.
Okay.
Carmine Gallo, Talk Like TED. I wrote my first TEDx talk, Lori, and then I read Carmine's book, and I rewrote my because he watched 400 or 500 talks and boiled it down to 9 things he believes are in every great one.
Mm-hmm.
Humor, passion, a surprise for the audience. My surprise for the audience in my first talk was I have my grandmother's suicide note, have it on a slide. So I put it up on the screen in the dark, 300 people in a dark theater, put it up on the screen. Now they think I'm going to read it to them, but they're going to have to read it. And I had a friend of mine, a voiceover actress in LA who lives with depression, recorded it, voiced it for me. So I put it on the screen, I wait a beat, and out of the darkness, this woman's voice, my dear children, I am so sorry to leave you, but it can't be helped. I mean, my grandmother speaking from the grave. You could hear the goosebumps in the room pop. That's how surprised they were. They weren't expecting it. That was my surprise for the audience. It didn't have to be that dramatic, but that was, that was yeah, so Talk Like Ted is a great name.
Okay.
If they want to do comedy, there's a book by a woman named Judy Carter, Carter, Judy Carter, called The New
Mhm.
Comedy Bible. The New Comedy Bible. It's not a joke writing book. She teaches you a process to turn your stories funny. It's a
Mm.
process. You write down the story, and then she has a formula. And I did a brain dump. That's one of the first exercises from like your first memory. And I was living in a neighborhood, I was about 5 or 6 years old, and it was me and 11 girls in the neighborhood. I didn't know Little League Baseball existed because I didn't have any friends, guys. We played horses. The problem with that, Lori, is when you get to junior high school, you realize no equestrian team. And 11 girls and me. So when we played doctor, there was always a line. It was more like playing HMO. So those are real stories, but with her formula to make them funny. And that's so if you want to do comedy or just want to add funny to a speech or whatever, it's a great book on writing comedy.
Mm. Well, our family, my dad was, he was such a comedian. He was always laughing. He had a turtle. We called it a turtle. And the whole family were all different, but we're all funny in our own ways. And I have to work at it. But I have a sister that is so funny and a brother that's really funny. But I like to be funny. I like to tell jokes. But
Yeah, my entire family. People ask me, were you born funny? Yes, as a matter of fact, an amusing thing happened on the way down the birth canal. But I was, I really was. People ask me, tell me about yourself. Well, I'm a comedian. No, not what you do, who you are. At the risk of being redundant, every fiber of my being. That is what's the word? Ichi, Ichi, my
oh,
purpose.
Ikigai?
Ikigai. Yeah, that's my Ikigai. I mean, that is who I am. That's the way my sister says I see the world a bubble off plum. You know, like how, yeah, because I see things. I mean, other people see them and hear them, but they don't process the way, you know what I mean? They don't think funny.
I was practicing that in Japan. Telling,
Really?
yeah, I told jokes and I would ask people something. And I speak enough Japanese just to get a, uh, shall we say, just basic type of thing. But I would ask them questions and they would be silly, and then they'd realize I was just being funny, trying to jodan des. That's a joke. Well, that's really, really good advice because there's a lot of people that want to be a TEDx speaker, and I did, I did have
And
to use
they
some.
need to apply. Because every now and then I get a client who says, I applied a couple times
It's
around
not
where I
enough.
live. No, I mean, you gotta, average I'd say for my clients is 2 dozen, 3 dozen applications. Sometimes on the first try, sometimes on the seventh or eighth or ninth, but generally 24 to 36.
Wow.
I've never done one I didn't have to fly to. I've never done one. We live in Oregon. I've never done one in Oregon or Washington, Northern California, it's always been two in Canada. It's always been flying off to someplace.
Hmm.
But they're
Both of mine
two.
were in Washington.
Beg your pardon?
Both of mine were in Washington.
Yeah, they're
Actually,
200.
one was during COVID, so we had to do it on Zoom. And we went
Mhm.
up to an office in Seattle and we filmed it there.
There are 200 plus in the US or North America, actually. I mean, there's plenty to apply for.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say just apply, apply, apply.
Apply,
Oh,
apply.
and on your application, the first hurdle, I believe, is creativity. You need a hook. You need to get their attention, like mental health and the orgasm. That was the second time, and I didn't have to audition. The one before that title was Suicide: The Secret of My Success, which is counterintuitive. Dead Man Talking, which is a play on the movie and book Dead Man Walking. And again, they said, look, no, you just come down here and do that. So that told me that the first thing you have to do is get their attention, because it's not really an application so much as a marketing pitch to the selection committee. You know, you need whatever you put in those first couple of boxes has got to be interesting, you know, to slow the scroll as they're going through 200 or 300 applications.
Mm-hmm.
And I when I work with my clients, we try very hard to make the title, like title and subtitle. Really, title usually is words we know the meaning of, but you can't quite figure out. I have a client who's been in AA for 20 some years, and he wrote a book called Sober Letters to My Drunken Self. Yeah, exactly. So that was the title. I can't even remember the subtitle, but within 4 or 5 applications, we got him a TEDx because it stopped them in their tracks, you know, because most people, it's kind of pedestrian, doesn't really sing. I had a friend of mine, Amy. She signed up with another coach before she knew I coached TEDx. She's like, "Oh man, I can't believe." I go, "Look, this good company, Amy. They put a lot of people on stage. It'll be fine." 3 months later, I got a call. She's crying. She's applied 80 times. 80. I said, "I can't believe it. It's a good idea. You got a book on that topic on Amazon. I mean, in a tough category, it's a bestseller. Send me what you're sending them." So she did. I looked at and I's dotted, T's crossed, grammar good, but just didn't really, grab you. So I said, "Amy, can I put some creative pixie dust on this?" She goes, "What have I got to lose?" They turned me down 80 times. Within 5 applications, she got TEDx Beacon Street, Boston, which again told me that all that was missing was something to get their attention, to get the audition. So anyway, so if you're filling out an app, try to be as creative as possible.
Well, that's very good advice. And do you have would you like to give just your final word of advice for on the topic you were talking about, suicide?
Yes, again, 8 out of 10 people are ambivalent. 9 out of 10 give hints in the last week leading up to an attempt, which means you can make a difference. You can save a life. And you can do it by doing something as simple as we're doing right here, and that is starting a conversation
Conversation.
if you know how. And guess what? You now know how.
I've enjoyed this so much. I've learned as well as it it is sobering because I had a cousin that committed suicide. Well, my cousin's husband committed suicide and it was awful. It's just everybody, just devastated everyone because no one had an idea that he was there.
Yes, and you hear it all the time. But now, hopefully, people who've heard this podcast, when people start talking about death or dying, or death and dying appears, or they start getting their affairs in order and they realize they're giving away prized possessions or whatever it is they heard me say, like, hold on. Or now they know what to say if somebody's depressed, or say if somebody is suicidal. It just doesn't take a clinician to stop a suicide. Just somebody to step in, hear or see something that sends off a signal, their radar goes off, and think, whoa, stop. Here's another one. Well, they won't have to worry about me after this weekend. Okay. You mean you're going back to college? You're moving away? You got another job? What exactly? Because it sounds innocuous, but it could be very seriously. They're going to end their lives and they wouldn't have to worry about it anymore.
Mm,
Just be on the lookout for, you know, we call it a gatekeeper. The gatekeeper stands there and watches people come and go and looks for,
mhm.
somebody struggling.
So that is really good. So you, the listening audience, now know about suicide prevention. And you may not have caught everything on this one talk, so listen again to this
Yeah.
Samurai Way podcast, and also go to Frank King's. He has many TEDx talks and a lot, I'm sure, on the internet, and you
Yep.
can find him. And we'll have that in the description later. So thank you very much for joining us today. We'll always have something interesting and different, and so be sure to subscribe, like, and share. So that's it for now. Mata ne. Bye-bye. And that's a wrap for today's episode, The Samurai Way. I hope you found a little inspiration, a new perspective, or just something to reflect upon as you go about your day. Now remember, the samurai spirit isn't just about history. It's about how you show up, face challenges, and live with purpose. Whether it's Ikigai guiding your path or a little extra Gambaru pushing you forward, keep walking strong. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share, or leave a review. It really helps. And if you've got some thoughts, questions, or you just want to connect, just contact me. So until next time, stay focused, stay determined, and keep living with purpose. Mata ne.